to the Billy Wilder Theater. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Hammer Museum, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I want to thank my wonderful colleagues at the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience and the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music for presenting this program with us as part of the international celebrations of the 150th anniversary of the birth of composer Arnold Schoenberg. So today we're here to celebrate Arnold Schoenberg's birthday and to learn about the making of the brilliant new opera, Schoenberg in Hollywood, by Tod Machover, which will have its West Coast premiere in just 2.5 hours at the Nimoy Theater on Westwood Boulevard. The opera explores the fascinating journey of the Austrian-born composer during his time in Los Angeles, where he navigated the tension between his artistic vision and Hollywood's cinematic allure. We're so lucky to be joined by composer Tod Machover, conductor Neal Stulberg, director Karole Armitage, and Arnold Schoenberg's son, Larry Schoenberg, for today's conversation, moderated by UCLA Musicology professor Joy Calico. After the program, we'll have a chance to continue the conversation over some light refreshments in the theater lobby. And thank you all for joining us. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Kligman, director of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience.
Thank you, Claudia, and we thank everyone here at the Hammer Museum. This has been a wonderful partnership. The Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience is housed at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. We focus on 3 goals: to advance scholarship, performance, and education of Jewish music in America. All 3 of these goals are part of this month's series of programs connected to the 150th anniversary of Arnold Schoenberg. Our production of Tod Machover's opera, Schoenberg in Hollywood, as you just heard, which will open in just a few hours at the Nimoy Theater, explores the life of this eminent composer during his time here in Los Angeles. And if you'd like to get tickets, if you don't have tickets yet, when you go to the cookie reception, there's a QR code right by the cookies. We have held 4 other sessions online and Zoom with leading scholars of Schoenberg and his contemporaries. Today's panel, we will look at the making of the opera with the creative team along with our special guest, Larry Schoenberg. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Professor Joy H. Calico, a musicologist who is a faculty member and chair of the Department of Musicology here at UCLA. Her scholarship focuses on interdisciplinary Cold War cultural politics, opera since 1900, and Arnold Schoenberg. She is author of several books, including Arnold Schoenberg's A Survivor from Warsaw in Post-War Europe, published by the University of California Press in 2014, which examines the cultural history of post-war Europe through the lens of the performance and reception of Arnold Schoenberg's A Survivor from Warsaw. I want to give my very special thanks to Professor Calico for her partnership to help develop all of our programs for the events this month and the many things that we're doing together, including the class that she and I co-teach. So without further ado, Professor Calico and all the members of today's panel, thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joy Calico. Thank you for joining us for this event. I am here with a star-studded cast, and so I will introduce our guests, and then we'll get to some discussion about the creation and production of this opera. So I'll start closest to me. Tod Machover, composer and inventor, is the Muriel R. Cooper Professor of Music and Media and director of the Opera of the Future group at the MIT Media Lab. He's been called a musical visionary by the New York Times and creates music that breaks traditional artistic and cultural boundaries and designs technologies that expand music's potential for everyone, from celebrated virtuosi to musicians of all abilities. He's received numerous prizes and honors, including those from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Fromm and Koussevitzky Foundations, the National Endowment of the Arts, and Musical America, which named him Composer of the Year. He was also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Machover is especially celebrated for his groundbreaking operas, including the AI-infused Valise, the audience interactive Brain opera, the robotic Death and the Powers, and today's Schoenberg in Hollywood. He's currently working on his next opera, The Overstory, based on Richard Powers' Pulitzer Prize-winning novel about the relationship between humans and the non-human world. Sitting next to Tod is Karole, I wanted to say Armitage. Is it Armitage?
Armitage.
Armitage. Karole Armitage is the director and renowned for pushing the boundaries to create contemporary works that blend dance, music, science, and the visual arts. Known as the punk ballerina, she creates work that is at once both esoteric and popular. She has choreographed Broadway productions, Cirque du Soleil, the 2020-2021 Fall-Winter Marc Jacobs fashion show, videos for Madonna and Michael Jackson, and films from Merchant Ivory Productions. In addition to creating over 100 works for her dance company, Armitage has directed operas and created new dance productions for major houses in the US and Europe. In 2019, she formed I Am a Dancer Films, made by and with dancers who comprise the cast, crew, gimbal operators, production designers, and costume designers. They make work for the screen to show dance from new perspectives. The cinematic styles include art films and hybrid documentaries. She has directed opera at the Teatro de San Carlo, Théâtre du Châtelet, Opéra de Nancy, Het Muziektheater, Boston Lyric Opera, and Opera Saratoga. And next to Karole, we have Neal Stulberg, my colleague from the UCLA School of Music. Neal Stulberg has conducted many of the world's leading orchestras: Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Houston, St. Louis, San Francisco Symphonies, Netherlands Radio Symphony, West German Radio Orchestra, Hong Kong Philharmonic, St. Petersburg Symphony Orchestra, and Moscow Chamber Orchestra. He's appeared as opera and ballet conductor in Europe and America. His performances of Mozart's concertos conducted from the keyboard have been uniformly praised for their buoyant virtuosity. Formerly assistant conductor of the Los Angeles Philharmonic under Carlo Maria Giulini, and music director of the New Mexico Symphony Orchestra, he is a recipient of the Seaver National Endowment for the Arts Conductors Award, America's most coveted conducting prize. Since 2005, he has served as professor and director of orchestral studies at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, and currently serves as artistic director of UCLA's Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience. And finally, we have Larry Schoenberg, son of Arnold Schoenberg. Born and raised in Los Angeles, studied French at UCLA and MPC at University of Grenoble. He is a former mathematics teacher at Palisades Charter High School, and he has taught at UCLA. He and his wife Anne run Belmont Music Publishers for performing publications of Arnold Schoenberg's music. So you can see why I'm very excited to have this star-studded cast with us today. I thought I would start with, you heard a little bit at the beginning about the fact that this is an opera literally about the composer Arnold Schoenberg in Hollywood. He does come to Hollywood, to Los Angeles, as part of that immigration of German-speaking Jews from Central Europe. Not only, but many of them find their way to the West Coast, and many of them do work in the Hollywood film business. And a real meeting between Schoenberg and the MGM director Thalberg did actually occur, where there was a conversation about the possibility that Schoenberg might write the score for the film The Good Earth. There are various versions of why that didn't happen, but they all come back to something related to Schoenberg wanting $50,000 in money at that time, and excessive artistic control. So that did not come to pass, but he definitely thought about this. So it also is a retrospective in some ways of other parts of Schoenberg's life. So I thought, since we have Larry here, would you be willing to start us off with some memories about your father? And I mean, primarily Los Angeles, because you joined the family in Los Angeles. So,
yeah, I should start with the fact that I was 10 years old when he died. So a lot of these the memories that I have would have come from a very young child. but they also come, there's these sort of fake memories come from my sister and my brother and things that you've read from other people. But we grew up here in Brentwood, or close. He taught here at UCLA, so I'm very familiar with, he was very familiar with this area. We grew up in a, what would, when one says a normal family, it was, for us, it was a normal family because it was the only family we knew. So we were very much, he was very much involved in the way we grew up, in terms of the things that we did together and our meals, and the very, very conventional, as I look back in retrospect on this, that it was very, very conventional. Maybe somewhat surprising because he was so much older than one would expect for a young child that I was. And our family was very close-knit. And one can, if one wonders if that's how that can be, or one wants verification or validity for that, you can see that we're all still very close. That my brother, who lives on our home in Rockingham still, and my sister who lives in Venice, not this Venice, but Venice, the other one, not, I realize this is the real one here, but the one that, so she's lived there in Italy, and she and my brother and I are very, very closely involved in all things Schoenberg. And that probably tells you a lot about the fact that we must have been a very close family, the fact that we all still work very, very, very well together. And I can use the word promoting or enjoying or whatever word you want to use with respect to our father. So we're home. He taught here at UCLA until he retired at the age of 70, so you can figure out what year that was. He died in 1951. And as far as what he would have, I wonder, when I had the luxury of being able to see a preview of this production, and I expected that one of the questions that would have been posed is, well, what would he have thought of it? And I want to start off, I want to answer that question before it's asked. I think he, and I'm not going to use the word like, because I think that's sort of a silly word, but I think I would rather use the word appreciate. He would have appreciated it. He would have appreciated the complexity. And he would have appreciated what you're going to hear about and see, and this idea of different levels, so many different layers, which is something that he himself, as you'll learn when you from the opera itself, that so many different levels of the way he would interpose just in his compositions, and of course in everything else that he did. So, in making a short answer long, that's it.
Do you have memories of him going to the movies? Did he take you to the movies?
No, the closest I have to that would be the 1 or 2 square inch television set that we had. If there's anyone here that had ever seen something like that, you used the 7 or 8 inch magnifying glass over the small screen television, and we would sit there, and that's the closest. And when he said when we got this, and the reason we got this as a family, because we were going next door because they had a real television set, so he wanted us to stay home. So we were there to watch only news. It lasted about a day. No, but we never went. I've read things about how he liked Hopalong Cassidy, and He liked the movies, and I have my own idea about all these things about why and what. And when we can talk, if you want to talk about that later, of what actually why he didn't end up actually, writing the score for the Good Earth.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. I would like to turn to Tod and Karole in particular, thinking about if the opera is in fact based, it's based on real events or based on someone's life. How do you make decisions about the creative process of adapting someone's life, which was a storied life in and of its own, quite apart from putting it on the stage? What types of creative choices do you make thinking about somebody's biography and then how to make an artwork out of that?
Well, I guess I can start. I grew up knowing quite well and loving Schoenberg's music. I had a dad who was an engineer and was always interested in new things, and my mom was a pianist who studied with Eduard Steuermann, actually. So we had Schoenberg's music in the house growing up, and it was always close to me. And it was in, I think, around 1994, we talked about this the other day, Alexander Ringer, who was a musicologist who turns out Joy studied with, has mixed memories of, wrote a book called Arnold Schoenberg, The Composer as Jew, which totally gave me a different idea about many things about Schoenberg's life. First of all, it was the first time that I'd read the story of Schoenberg meeting Thalberg. It was told very, very clearly in that book. And the idea, I'd known that Schoenberg had ended up in LA, and the idea of this incredibly, very serious, deeply serious, uncompromising composer who didn't pander to anybody, didn't compromise, I think is one of the things I admire most about him, ending up in, the capital of popular culture. Not that there wasn't in the 30s an incredibly rich, full artistic life, but, a place where a high value was put on making work that could reach huge numbers of people. And that paradox of what it felt like for Schoenberg to be here, how it was that he had such a nice life here. He, as we all know, he played tennis with George Gershwin. He knew Charlie Chaplin. It was Harpo Marx who gave his name to Irving Thalberg. And that juxtaposition really interested me. And you probably remember, Larry, but when I first had this idea, I was good. I think it was about the time that the archives had gone from USC back to Vienna. And I was good friends with Christian Meyer, who was the first director of the Schoenberg Center in Vienna. And I told Christian about this idea. I said, I've got this, I really, really admire Schoenberg, and I read this book and know so much more about how unbelievably interesting his life was and how courageous he was and how, he lived through and experienced personally and through his music all the important things that happened in Western culture from the late 19th century through World War II. I really want to write an opera about this. Christian, do you think I'm nuts? And he said, well, you're always nuts, but it sounds like a good idea. And I said, you have worked with the Schoenberg family. Is there any chance you could introduce me to them? And I don't know if you remember, but Christian Meyer organized a dinner at his house in Vienna with the three of you. Do you remember that? With you and Ron and Nuria?
There's so much plaque right now.
No. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it was incredibly meaningful for me because early on in the project, I got to say, I would love to do this, and would you nix it? Would you encourage it? And you were all really wonderful through the whole process, I must say, and I've sent you texts along the way. But just quickly, and then I'll pass along to Karole. I think for a while when I thought about this project, my original idea really was to set it all during Schoenberg's time in Hollywood, and because as we know, the emigre life here was so rich, the people that Schoenberg was in touch with, it was just an amazing period, an amazing life. And as we started talking about it, I worked very closely on the scenario with someone named Bram Murray, who's a great director, who was one of my closest collaborators for 25 years or so. And we put together the original idea. And Bram had the idea at some point of saying, we could tell the story just in LA, But the story really is about Schoenberg's relationship to Los Angeles and to film and to popular culture. And we could probably do something slyer or more interesting, which is to look at Schoenberg's life through the history of film and through his relationship to film, maybe starting with Thalberg and almost ending with Thalberg. And so that's what we did. And so we decided to make, you'll see today, or whenever, I hope you can come and see the opera, that it moves quite quickly. It moves kind of with the speed of film, so it cuts from character to character. There are only three singers on stage. There's Omar Ibrahim. You're going to see an amazing performance by one of the great singer-actors of our time, I think, who plays Arnold Schoenberg. And then there are two young singers who play boy and girl, and they shift role really often. Karole can tell you about how difficult it is to create those roles, for them to shift not just costumes, but style and personality. And we made a story which took so many scenes, real scenes from Schoenberg's life. I think it was Joe Auner, a great Schoenberg scholar. We had a Zoom symposium the other day, and Joe said, you might come to this opera and think that the creators made up a lot of these crazy stories. And he said, Schoenberg really did. These are real things that happened in this man's life. So really the question was how to pick important things in an incredibly varied life. And so you'll see the Thalberg story, and then back from really when he's born all the way till the time he comes to Hollywood, shown through the history of music, through Schoenberg's music, through the history of film, and hopefully through my music, because after all, that's why I wanted to do this project. So maybe I'll turn it over to you as to telling the story and how we picked and what it means to put it on stage.
Yes, well, I was not there during the great dilemmas of what the actual content would be. I mean, that's the hardest part. I came where the part is easy. Incredible music had been written, an incredible libretto was in place, and then it was my job to turn that into life on the stage. And I'm very grateful that you included so much of his rich European and Jewish life, because to see the complexity of this person's consciousness is, for me, the great joy of this work, because everything from spiritual life to comedy to political life, married life, and of course, the incredible demands he put upon himself as an artist. So it's, there's nothing simple. It's not about winning, which maybe Hollywood movies tend to be about, simple solutions. This is about really the complexity of being a person and being a great artist, and I love it enormously. It is an incredible entertainment at the same time that it is a truly profound look at the questions one poses as to how to live one's life. So these two characters of the boy and girl, who are kind of the energy of the Hollywood 30s, the youthful, optimistic kids who really know nothing about hardship. So they start with that vitality of American optimism, and then they have to morph into all different kinds of characters. And sometimes they're just figments of imagination, or they're like just carrying a prop. I mean, it's not literalism. It's all, as I say, it's all these many layers of how our consciousness works in a way, and how we're formed by our situation, but also how we involve ourselves with those situations. So I thought that the way, partly based on the music and partly based on the libretto, to bring alive this sort of American vitality was to use kind of musical comedies of the 30s, dance for the singers, which is, not the easiest thing for them. But because singers use their body, like dancers, by listening to music and reacting with the music, they can all do it really well. They know how to make body language manifest so that the audience can read body language, and they're doing the dancing beautifully. And then they have to become, well, the boy has to become Thalberg, somebody of incredible power and elegance and dismissiveness and so a complete opposite kind of character. And then the girl has to become a snooty secretary, and she has to be each of the wives. Anyway, it's this wonderfully rich tapestry that has to turn on a dime with split-second timing about keeping the complexity clear for the audience and to capture the emotion, the situation for every single little nuance of the complexity of the story.
Thank you for that. I want to keep going with the performance aspect of this. So thinking about, Neal, your work as conductor, I have many questions about this, but one of them has to do with the process of working with live musicians in the pit or at the cube, whatever, the cube, I guess it is in this case, and singers on the stage, and having to synchronize all of that with fixed media, meaning film clips over which you do not have any control. So could you say something about what it's like to synchronize all of that?
Sure. Well, the first thing that you will notice is that the orchestra is in back of the singers, which poses the question, well, how do they see the conductor, and how does the conductor see them? This is not completely unheard of in opera production. It actually is not that uncommon, but the technical solution to this is that there are a couple of monitors on both sides of the house that are fixed on me that the singers can see. There are also times when the singers are actually upstage of me, and so we can have direct contact that way. And I have a monitor in front of me that shows the stage and shows the screen on which all of the visual information is. And of course, there are also supertitles, which is great for the audience too. That said, it's a very complex score. It requires a tremendous amount of precision, coordination. Everything is very meaningful in the score, and the text, of course, has to be projected in a very clear way, because the text is, as Carole says, very rich and profound. So it's an orchestra of 15, just to say. There is a string quintet, 3 winds, a flute who doubles on piccolo, a clarinetist, another clarinetist who doubles on bass clarinet, 4 brass players, trumpet, trombone, horn, tuba, a percussionist. You'll see an amazing array of percussion surrounding in
a very small space.
In a very small space. And 2 keyboardists, one playing piano and synthesizer, a synthesizer part that is like a piano part, and one playing another synthesizer who does not actually play piano music, but actually plays notes that trigger certain sounds and effects. So it's we have a spectacular pianist who is doing this, and no one will get to see what a spectacular pianist she is, because she's going like this. But she is. But it also requires somebody who can stay exactly with a score with very complex metrical design and things like that. So. This is a piece that rewards the amount of work that one puts into it, and everybody, I think, is very excited about where it's come and how it takes a while for everybody to get how it all fits together, but it's been a very, very rich experience, and I think for the audience it is so thought-provoking, and it gives there's so much to digest in terms of war and romance and family and art and commerce and all of these issues that really affect all of us now in the present.
I have a funny anecdote just to add to, the small space the musicians are in. Musicians always want more space than I tend to think they need. But this time I was like, oh my gosh, how are they going to get in there?
And when they get in, how can they get out?
How can they get in? How can they get out? And then as the two singers are starting to do their very first dance, the violinist goes like this and hits them because that is how tight it is. Well, we figured out how to resolve that problem, but it's impressive that they're doing it.
Live performance, ladies and gentlemen. Yep, those things can happen. Tod.
I was just going to say something precise and technical about the question of playing live with fixed media. And so for my whole career, I've spent a lot of time thinking about combining live performance and technology in various ways, and especially acoustic instruments and electric instruments. And I do it in different ways for different pieces. This particular one, the way it works is pretty simple, but it's important that, I think in general in any piece, but especially in opera, it's important that the musicians never have to follow the electronics, because there's so much. I mean, Neal's doing an unbelievable job keeping all these people together and keeping them relaxed and confident. So the way it works, as he said, is that the first keyboard player has quite a complex part on acoustic piano, which would be played like any of the instrumental ensemble. And then at times, that person plays on a second keyboard, which is an electronic keyboard, which has many, many different sounds that are kind of complex blends of sounds that player can change a little bit during the performance. But that is also played like a normal part. It's written out like a normal keyboard part. And the only thing we have to make sure is that the person has time. He has to actually move from one instrument to the other and has a lot of different buttons to push to change the sounds. So we have to make sure that's foolproof and easy to do. And then the second keyboard player, this great player who has a bit of an ungrateful part, but she's fantastic. She does follow the score. She does press buttons, and she actually presses keys very, very often, sometimes as often as every measure, or sometimes a couple of times in a measure. And each time that she presses a key, some special kind of sound happens. And that's scored so that anytime something rhythmically has to be more coordinated with the ensemble, instead of the ensemble having to listen to the electronics and come in, that person at the second keyboard is listening, is following Neal, and plays that at exactly the right time. So Neal doesn't have to worry about where the electronics are. And the same thing's true for all the visuals. I don't think anybody's, well, maybe other people have done this, but there are things on the screen almost all the time. And they also change. I mean, it's continuous, so you won't notice. It's not jerky at all. But there's somebody, it's actually the stage manager, who calls all the changes every time the video has to change. And sometimes it's one scene, looks like the same scene, but it has to coordinate with a particular measure. And so there are hundreds and hundreds of these little tiny changes that all have to be coordinated by the stage manager, cued by a video director, and are absolutely synchronized with the score. And it all means that all the electronics follow you rather than you having to follow it. It makes it pretty simple structure. It works really well, but it makes a difference because it feels very flexible. There's nothing that ever feels rigid, I think, in the performance.
Yeah, Larry.
Yeah, you got me thinking about this, because it's something that was so important for my father was comprehensibility. And that was a word that he used in many, many of his lectures. And he wanted things to be comprehensible. And so you have this conflict that he had his whole life between comprehensibility and complexity. And I think that's something that you're going to experience here. And that's why I'm suggesting you may want to see this more than once.
4 times. It's amazing that you said that. I didn't know that he talked about that. So that's at the end of the day one of the main things the opera is about, is the balance that we all have about exploring in our own lives all the complexity of our feelings and our reactions and how to behave, how to keep learning about the world and at the same time needing to take action. You know, you can't spend all your life learning. You have to sometimes say, I know when I have to do something right now. And one of the reasons I'm so interested in Arnold Schoenberg as a composer and as a figure is I think he grappled with this his entire life more honestly, without one answer, than just about anybody I can think of. And, you know, by the time he got to LA in 1934, he saw what was coming with anti-Semitism and with Nazism very early on. In the early 20s, he saw what was going to happen, earlier than most people. Nobody really listened to him. And by the time he got here, what he really wanted to do was let everybody know what was going on in Europe, to wake up, to stop this. And at the same time, he needed to write the music that was honest and was his music. And so how to get that message out loud and clear and to write music which had all the richness that he believed in was, you know, one of the monumental kind of, I don't know what the word is, but it was a great artistic and human challenge, I think, which is what the work's about. What did he feel when you say communicability, or what did he, what obsessed him about that?
It was so important for him that because he felt so many people didn't understand what he was doing and reacted so negatively. And I think probably the best example is his composition with 12 tones, that when one uses that sort of iconically in a negative way, that for him that was something that was really important as he evolved in his compositional style. He didn't force anybody else to. In fact, he didn't even teach that to his students, which is sort of astonishing. But it was something that he would, just from the general public, that he would, or when he would read he had that terrible mistake of reading all the reviews and reacting to them. But it's quite different actually in Europe than it is here. But he did react always to those, and one of the things was the frustration he had. So it was always this, you know, things need to be more. He understood things need to be more. He wanted things to be more comprehensible. He tried that. He tried it in various means. He did it through his obviously through his composition, but also his writings and his paintings. They're a little bit easier because you can actually look at some of his paintings and you can understand exactly what he's trying to say with his paintings. There's some obvious ones he talks about. They're entitled Music Critic, and so there's a couple of a music critic, and one of them has giant ears, great big ears, and the other one has no ears. And he does that with, there's other things, art patron and things of that nature. But with his paintings, it was, I think, easier for him. In his writings, he wrote an enormous amount. And of course, the most important was in his compositions, and I think that's where he was most frustrated.
And the other area where he was so important in terms of transmitting information was through his teaching. Don't forget that, because he was a great teacher and really cared about it. You were telling me just the other day that he had these big classes and he prepared a different exercise for every single student.
It wasn't just the exercise, it was the final examination. And you can imagine if you were the student that got something that was very simple. You might be happy that you got something very simple to do, but if you thought about it, or maybe you wouldn't even think about it if it were that simple. And then at the other extreme, he would have a student that he thought should get pushed and give him a much more difficult question for the final examination. So he would do that for each student. He would base the final exam or the examination based on how he felt what would be the best for that particular student. Now, some people think that isn't fair, but that's not the point of education, to be fair.
I want to see if I could get Neal and Tod to talk a little bit about the role of musical quotations and allusions in the score. Obviously, it is Tod's original work, but part of how the story is told is not only through the action by the live players and on the film, but also there are quotations from music that come from the same time period as these episodes in Schoenberg's life. And so I would just be curious to hear what it was like for you, how you put that together. And then Neal, did you name that tune as you went through the score? Because I kind of did. I kind of was like, oh, I do know what that is, or no, I did not know what that was. So,
well, the first thing I'll say is that operas, any work, but operas are big projects, and they all have different ways of starting, and I find it usually takes a while to get one of my operas from when I have an original idea to finding out how to make it real and how to get it produced. This one took a really long time. I had the idea originally in 1994, and there were various people. We wrote an early scenario, and there were various people who were interested, but it was a complex story. It was not a lot of people thought it was great, Tod, maybe not this one. And the reason I mention it is that when Esther Nelson, who was running Boston Lyric Opera at the time, in about 2016 or so, came to me and said, we'd just be interested in having you write an opera. Do you have any ideas? And we talked about a couple of things. And when I said, I've been really wanting to write this Schoenberg and Hollywood opera for a long time, she immediately said, it's a great idea. Let's do it. And the second she said that, I said,
Panicked.
Yeah. I was like, oh no. It just dawned on me that I had pitched writing an opera about another composer, a composer I admired, and all the problems of, I didn't want to write a pastiche opera of kind of bad versions of Schoenberg. I didn't want to write an opera, of lots of his work, not an original language. So I realized I'd have to make up my own language that could have a place for these things, and also, a language which embodied this basic idea of the balance between comprehensibility and complexity. And so I tried. There are bits of real Schoenberg in there, not so many, but there are some, and hopefully they're presented in a way that you'll love them, because they're things that should be loved. The other things I think just came in my writing that wasn't planned at all.
Oh, okay.
I didn't at all think from the beginning of, if we're going to... Actually, yeah, I won't tell you what's in there, but, if we have a scene in the Wild West, or if we have a scene with Humphrey Bogart, Arnold Schoenberg as Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, or if we have a scene... It was just too tempting to have just a bit of something that was ground, that you'll recognize, and then everything's twisted. But there are things you recognize, right?
Yes, and it's always a kind of...
say no.
It's always a kind of Easter, what do they call it, an Easter egg thing?
Yeah.
In rehearsal, when you get to these places and the orchestra, you see everybody kind of smile. But the other interesting thing is that a lot of the cultural references are mid-century, 20th century cultural references. And they're not references that are necessarily in the consciousness of a young musician. So, for example, there is a line towards the beginning, as you mentioned, Harpo Marx introduces the two of them, and Thalberg says, Harpo Marx says, you are our greatest living composer, and what Harpo says deserves to be listened to. And of course the joke is, Harpo never says anything in the movies. So...
I'll tell you, just another quick one. The last performance we had of Schoenberg in Hollywood was in China, of all places, in Shenzhen. It turned out to be a fantastic performance, but we did all of the collaboration by Zoom, all young Chinese creative team, singers, was amazing. I went over, I had no idea how it was going to go. But I remember the last creative meeting we had, like a week before I was flying to China. I was on Zoom with the director, and she was brilliant and had figured out the piece. And just before we were going to hang up, she said, "I just have one question. Who are the Marx Brothers?" And I was like, "Oh, wait, maybe there are a bunch of things you don't understand." And so, yeah. But
Yeah, those mid-century. Yes, we will be. My students and I will be talking about that in class on Tuesday, actually. So some of the artists need to get to the venue. There's some things that need to be addressed, but we do have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question they'd like to pose to our guests? I can't really see, but I'm told there are ushers.
are there ushers with microphones?
I was told there would be ushers. Ah, I see one.
Hi, Professor Calico. This is Anna.
We can't see
Hi,
you.
Anna.
Sorry, I know you
Extra
probably
credit.
can't see me. Yeah, but I'm really glad that I came. I'm a music education major, and something that really intrigued me is what I'm very, very sorry that I forgot your name, but Arnold Schoenberg's son.
Calico?
No.
Larry. So something Larry mentioned about how education isn't meant to be fair. Could you expand on that? I just found it really intriguing. Sorry, I know it's a little random.
This is
what
why
time
I
of the
asked
day?
if I
Sorry
could.
you
Yeah,
asked.
this is why I asked if I could have control of Larry's mic, and they wouldn't let me have it. But sure.
Okay, I'll start with, what was the question again? Oh, no, I think that's a very good question. That's what, I'm really glad you asked that question. What was it?
No, you said in your comment that in talking about your father customizing the exam for everybody, you said maybe that's not fair, but education's not meant to be fair. And she said, why did you say that?
I was responding to someone that said it wasn't fair because they felt that everyone should get an A, or everyone shouldn't get an A, or somehow that he shouldn't differentiate among the students. So it was sort of the person that I was responding to, and the reason I made that comment was because they felt it should be more democratic, and that everyone should be treated the same. In this case, you weren't treating what he was doing is not treating everyone the same in the class. He was giving a much more difficult final exam to someone that he felt would benefit more from that, as opposed to someone that wouldn't. And for him, I think what I would like for you to understand from that is his attitude towards education, and that it wasn't getting the grade, and it was elevating the student from wherever they were. And that was something he wrote about always, all the time, about the quality, the education that he wanted to give the student. He would be teaching things differently with Alban Berg or Anton Webern, and with a student at UCLA. So it was just as important to him, and he was very much involved with the students. I want to just comment on just one time he came home. And this is from my sister, and it's just a wonderful story where he was apparently just really in a good mood, really, really happy. And my sister asked him, my sister Nuria said, well, Daddy, we called him Daddy, what happened? What happened at UCLA? What it was. And he said, I finally got through to her. What it was he was in one of his classes. There was a student, and we're not allowed to talk about low quality. Everything is highest quality. But anyway, she was having difficulty, but he was so happy, so pleased, because she finally understood what something that he was teaching her, and that was something that was really, really important to him. So it wasn't based on the excellence of the student, but it was just on the person or the individual. And I think that tells you a lot about him and about his teaching, here. Well, I was told today that this is not UCLA, or it is, or is that just for parking? Okay, just for parking. Okay, so that was here. Then I can use the word here. So here at UCLA, that was that experience. So I didn't answer your question, but I had something kind of better to say. Anyway.
Anyone else have a question?
I see a hand here.
Hi, thank you guys so much for your panel. My question was, so this opera has been performed in many different locations and countries. So now that it's in Hollywood, sort of where what it's about, Schoenberg in Hollywood, what I guess about this production or putting it together here has been special compared to the other locations you've put it together?
Is that Alec?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was always a dream of mine to have this piece come here, because it's about here and it's about a journey here. And I could say so many, I'll say two things. One is that I really have to thank the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, Neal Stulberg, the Lowell Milken Center, Mark Kligman, everybody involved have been and Joy, everybody who's been supporting this project, Judith Fennell, Don Franzen, since the very beginning of kind of discussing having the project come. I've done a lot of projects, lots of places, but I've rarely had a project where so many people at the beginning of the project said, we care about this, it should be here, let's make it happen. And it's just been a wonderful collaboration. I think that all happened hopefully because people liked the piece, but also because they thought it would have resonance here. And that's the second part of it, which is that, you know, so many people, both performing in it and friends. A friend, Michael Pizer, is sitting there, a friend of mine from high school, who's a very prominent film producer. You know, I have many friends here, but many people in the film industry, many people who know these experiences that are expressed in this opera from different points of view. And I think the issues posed and the way they're posed in this opera will, I think, have a special significance for people who live here because of the way that all the different arts and commercialism and you know, serious art all are intermixed. The reference, I mean, there's UCLA all through the opera, a couple of places, really surprising places I won't tell you ahead of time.
There are also UCLA students, so keep an eye out.
Yeah. So I think it has a special, you know, I think it will mean something special here because I think people will understand the subject and the issues at hand probably more than any other place. So it means a huge amount to have it performed here. We'll see. Today's our first performance. So a microphone for down here.
It's coming.
Sorry, it's such a long walk.
Tod, I read your bio and so on, but I would be very interested if you could just take a few minutes and reflect on the major influences in your life that really tailored your career and really brought you into this field that you are in today.
Wow, thank you for the question. Yeah, I'll try to do that pretty quickly. I grew up in New York, and I think my two biggest influences were my parents. And as I mentioned before, my dad was from the Midwest. He was not a musician at all. He was a visual person, totally a popular culture guy. You know, he went to the movies all the time. He grew up in not a very wealthy family. I think his parents just let him go to the movies on the weekends. But he was an engineer and was one of the first people in the field of computer graphics and really had this deep belief that if technology wasn't something that people could use intuitively, that it wouldn't catch on. And so he had some of the first companies that put images on screens. And he was quite well known for kind of getting computer graphics around. And so I used to go to his factories and see. My mom grew up in upstate New York from a kind of high art European, snobby artistic family. And she was a terrific pianist, was the oldest of 3 daughters, and went to Juilliard and studied with Edward Steuermann, one of Schoenberg's main collaborators. But like so many people, when she graduated, I was the oldest of 3 kids, and she was decided to teach rather than tour. And she was a brilliant woman, a wonderful piano teacher, but she really believed in teaching music theory and also music creativity to kids. Really had this belief that music was something that you should make yourself and not just. So when we were little, like I said, I was the oldest of 3. I was I was the guinea pig. So at age 3 or 4, we'd have our piano lessons, and then she'd say, okay, before you go home, there are a few of you, I'll give you 10 minutes to go around the house and find something that makes an interesting sound. So we'd go around and find something in the kitchen or a lamp or a book or the cat or I don't know, something. And we come back and literally sit down and she'd say, okay, what sound does that make? And that, oh great. What's the loudest sound you can make with that? What's the softest sound? What would it be like if that sound and that sound together? Oh great. Could you give a word to that sound? Okay, we have these sounds and we have some words. Let's tell a story with it. How would you start? What would come next? Great, now we have this story. When you go home this week, why don't you make a picture of that so that when we come back next week, we can remember it and we'll play it again. And so just with something simple like that, we all learned that music wasn't just something written, by a bunch of dead people on printed paper, and the music systems were something that had to do with the real world, and that they were things that human beings invented for particular reasons. Music was a way of telling stories, and even something complex like music notation was just a way of writing something down in some form so you could remember it and interpret it again. Sorry. So that was really important to me, and I think also the fact that they were really a great couple, actually, and they were also so very different. And I think I was obsessed with why they got along so well and how these worlds of kind of technology and humanism and, American popular culture and European high art fit together. And they were also kind of social activists, both of them. They also believed that, anything you did should get to people, and they were always involved with what was going on in the world. And so those were my big influences. And I started out actually being more, I was interested more in music than in technology, but I was more interested in politics actually than either of those. And I wanted to be president or a Senate page or a senator or something when I was little. And but little by little, I realized, I think when I was in high school, right before I went to college, I realized that composing, I'm a cellist, but I realized that composing was what brought together everything I cared about and everything that I was good at and things I wasn't. So I realized intuitively that composing was something that was going to keep me on my toes for my whole life, and it has. So anyway, there's more, but that's the basic idea.
That seems like a fitting place to end. I understand we have cookies in the lobby, and so we will let our artists get to the theater, but please join me in thanking them, and we will speak to you in the lobby.